with Augusta releasing relatively soon and us now knowing what both her weapon and her set do, I've started to think more and more about shields. Shields are one of the most underused mechanics within Wuthering Waves, and I think that at this point I have absolutely no trouble calling it irrelevant. So let's talk about it. Shields in WuWa are obviously a counterpart to healing. In most of these gacha games, shielders and healers are seen as if they take up the exact same team slot. But then why are there no dedicated shield characters like there are dedicated healers? Shorekeeper and Verena are two of the best characters in the game, and they are dedicated healing characters focused entirely on their ability to heal and doing almost no damage. We even have characters like Baizha and Yohu who are also dedicated healers. And yet we don't really have something like this for shielders. Shielders are simply not seen as equally as healers, and from a surface level, there is absolutely zero reason for this. So I wanted to talk about the current shielders in-game, and talk about why they simply pale in comparison to our healers. Starting with the 1.0 cast of shielders, which is almost all of them to be honest. Those characters being Taocha, Genshin, and Yuanwu if you count his sequences. These are all the shielding characters that we have, and if you can see a theme here, it's that not a single one of them is meant to be a pure shielder. You have Taocha, who is meant to be a sub-DPS buffing resonance skills, Genshin doing the same thing for resonance liberations, and then Yuanwu who, honestly I have no clue who Kuro Games wanted you to play this dude with. But as you can see, not a single one of them is meant to be a pure shielder of the likes like Verena and Shorekeeper, which also meant that every single one of them isn't as universal as those two characters. And it doesn't help that in each of their individual kits, they have a lot of problems. Taocha and Genshin both suffer from an incredibly long field time, especially Genshin with her Forte, to the point where her fastest rotation doesn't even use her Forte at all, which means that Genshin ended up being incredibly bad. Taocha also has an incredibly long rotation, which thus massively hampered her performance in the meta. And like I said before, Yuanwu doesn't really have any character that he has any sort of inherent synergy with. The only character that anyone actually plays Yuanwu with is obviously Jinshi for his coordinated attacks, but even in that team he's simply an E-bot that uses his skill and then swaps out. So shields had an incredibly weak start at the beginning of Wuthering Waves, and this is one of the biggest reasons why shields ended up becoming a nearly irrelevant mechanic within the game, because they simply did not make a good first impression. Verena and Baizha were the quintessential sustains at the beginning of the game, so obviously Kuro Games wanted to move forward with healing when it comes to sustains in the game. And while shields aren't a completely dead mechanic, which we know through Brant and now Augusta, Kuro Games clearly isn't putting as much attention on it. But outside of their first impression, is there any reason why shields aren't as valued as healing? Well, there is some things that come to mind, but there isn't actually anything that I would say is a major deal breaker for shields. I would say that the primary thing that's limiting shields right now is their lack of any sort of preventative utility. The big thing with getting hit in WuWa is not how much damage you're taking. No, the big thing with getting hit in WuWa is the fact that you get knocked on your ass. Shorekeeper gets around this simply by making you able to get a free dodge anyway, and Lupa also has a mechanic that lets you automatically get a perfect dodge. But shields don't have any sort of mechanic like this. The difference between shielding and healing is that shielding prevents you from getting damaged in the first place, while healing heals up your wound after you've already been damaged. So giving you a free dodge counter sounds perfect for healing, which is meant to be more reactionary, and then by this logic, shielding should just allow you to ignore knockback entirely. But that's the thing, it doesn't. And let me tell you, if it did, Brant would feel a whole lot better to play, I'll just say that. Shields simply do not have any sort of thing that makes them stand out, especially when you consider that the healing characters also often has access to revives. Shorekeeper and Verena do, and I'm pretty sure Baizha does as well. So the fact that shields do not have any sort of way to keep you alive, even if you mess up, means it's a lot more punishing to use a shielding character compared to a healing character. And I feel it should be the exact opposite. Shields should function as a safety net, but in reality, it really feels like your shield gets knocked out in 2 hits, and suddenly you're defenseless. because if you're running a shielder in your team and you don't have any form of healing, any damage that you take will stay there. So shields really do not have anything that separates it from healing. And because most shields that are applied are simply applied by one ability and not ever refreshed at any point, it just makes it even more punishing. Because someone like Shorekeeper or Verena can drop down a field or add a mark on enemies that allows you to continuously heal, but shielders do not have a way to continuously refresh the shields. So ultimately, in the long term of your gameplay, shields are simply worse at keeping you alive compared to healing. And that brings me to the final point, which is that when compared to healing characters, shielding characters simply have less utility. This is partially from their own kit, but also partially from just the game in its current state. Rejuvenating Glow is an incredibly powerful set, and it has the condition of healing your allies. It's actually the best set to use on Spectra Rover, it's best in slot on Arrow Rover when you're using them in a GN team, it's best in slot on even Yuenwu, simply because there is a 3-star weapon that allows him to heal for 1 tick. Rejuvenating Glow is an incredibly powerful set, and shields don't really have an equivalent to this. If there was a shielding equivalent to Rejuvenating Glow, shields would instantly get a ton more value within the game, because they would have their own form of buffing utility that healers do not have access to. At this point, they can even give interruption resistance through a Sonata effect, and shielders would get a lot better through this, because they would finally have a way to stand out from the healers that are currently dominating the sustain meta within the game. Additionally, like I said earlier, shielders are often just worse characters when compared to healers. Genshin and Taucha have long rotations, and are thus obviously worse than characters like Verena or Shorekeeper. They also do not have universal buffs that make these two healers as powerful as they are. If you simply made a shielding character that had universal utility, like the current meta healers do, you would automatically create a character that's better than almost every other shielder in the game. In theory, if you took Shorekeeper, took all of her healing, turned it into shields, and created a Sonata effect that would also buff your team whenever you apply a shield, we would theoretically get a character that is just as good as the Shorekeeper. But because we do not have a character like this, shields are simply seen as inferior. So to summarize everything I talked about, I believe the way to make shielders actually relevant is by, first of all, give shielders better kits that either give them universal buffing or very good buffing for a specific demographic. Second of all, add a Sonata set that actually allows shielders to buff your team, much like Rejuvenating Glow. And then third of all, embrace the nature of shields and make them better at preventing you from getting damage in the first place. For example, by giving you interruption resistance or damage reduction. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think of shields in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Additionally, if you want to ask me any questions, check out my Discord, which is linked in the description. Additionally, if you just want to see more of me, check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. I primarily talk about PGR, but I kinda just make videos about whatever I feel like. But that'll be all from me. Peace.